They found the first body at 3:47 hours, floating face down in the Potomac, 3 miles downstream from the Pentagon boat launch. No ID, no wallet, just a waterlogged flight suit and a tattoo on the left shoulder blade that made Detective Matt Stone's blood run cold. A trident. Not the Navy SEAL kind. This one was different. Older. More intricate. The kind you don't see unless you've been places the government pretends don't exist. Stone had been retired from the D.C. Metro Police for 18 months, but Lieutenant Sarah Chun called him anyway. She knew his history. 23 years on the force, the last 8 working joint task forces with federal agencies on cases that never made the papers. Cases involving military personnel who died in ways that didn't add up. Cases that got buried under mountains of classified stamps and national security redactions. "I need your eyes on this, Matt," Chun had said over the phone at 4 in the morning. This isn't random. By the time Stone arrived at the Riverside crime scene, the fog was lifting off the water like smoke from a dying fire. The body had been pulled onto the shore, covered with a tarp that fluttered in the pre-dawn breeze. Stone lifted the corner and studied the corpse. Male, mid-30s, physically fit despite being in the water for at least 12 hours. The flight suit was black, no insignia, no name tape. But that tattoo, Stone had seen it before. "Run the prints yet?" he asked Chun. She shook her head. "That's the problem. His fingertips are gone. Acid looks like someone didn't want him identified." Stone knelt beside the body, pulling out a small flashlight. He examined the flight suit more carefully. The fabric was expensive, military grade, but not standard issue. Custom work. The kind of gear worn by pilots who flew missions that officially never happened. He found what he was looking for sewn into the inner collar, a tiny fabric tag with a number, 247. "Sarah, I need you to run a check on military personnel reported missing in the last 72 hours. Focus on naval aviators, Air Force special operations." "Matt, you know they won't give us access to. They will if you mention Project Siren." Chin's face paled. Even in civilian law enforcement, certain names carried weight. Siren was one of them, a whispered legend about deep-sea military operations that went wrong, about technology that should never have been developed, about people who vanished into classified black holes and never came back. While Chin made her calls, Stone walked the shoreline. The Potomac was calm this morning, but something felt wrong. The water had an unusual shimmer to it, almost oily, but when he knelt to examine it closer, his reflection stared back with startling clarity. Too clear, like the water was somehow purified, distilled to an impossible transparency. His phone buzzed. Chin's voice was tight when she answered. "Matt, we got a hit. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Martinez, call sign Maverick, reported missing from Naval Air Station Oceana 3 days ago. She took an F/A-18 Hornet without authorization and disappeared over the Atlantic." Stone felt the familiar chill that came with connecting dots others missed. What else? Her file's mostly redacted, but there's something else. She had a brother, Lieutenant David Martinez, call sign Razor 6. He vanished 13 years ago during a classified operation. Officially declared Kia, but the body was never recovered. Let me guess, he was involved with Project Siren. "How did you know?" Stone stared at the water, watching the unnatural shimmer spread in slow ripples. "Because I think she came looking for him, and I think she found something." By noon, the FBI had arrived to take over the scene. Agent Patricia Reeves, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with the kind of bearing that suggested military background, immediately tried to dismiss Stone from the investigation. "This is a federal matter now, Detective. We appreciate Metro PD's initial response, but you need someone who understands what you're really dealing with," Stone interrupted. "I've been tracking these cases for 8 years. Military personnel dying in impossible circumstances. Technology that defies physics. Cover-ups that go all the way to the Pentagon. You want to solve this, you need me. Reeves studied him for a long moment. What do you know about Project Siren? Enough to know that whatever killed that pilot is still out there. And enough to know that Maverick didn't go rogue. She went hunting. 3 hours later, Stone found himself in the back of an unmarked government sedan, racing toward Naval Air Station Potomac River. Reeves had made a phone call, and suddenly doors that had been locked for years were opening. The FBI wasn't just investigating a death. They were trying to prevent something worse. 12 hours ago, Reeves explained as they drove, NORAD detected an unauthorized aircraft approaching the USS Enterprise carrier group in the Pacific. The pilot identified herself with a call sign that's been on the prohibited list for over a decade. Maverick. She's alive. More than alive. She's operational. And according to our sources, she's activated something that's been dormant since her brother disappeared. Stone watched the Maryland countryside blur past the window. What happened to Razor 6? David Martinez was part of a deep-sea reconnaissance mission in 2011. They were investigating anomalous sonar readings in the Philippine Trench, bioluminescent signatures that didn't match any known marine life. The entire team vanished. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace. Except for the project files. Reeves nodded grimly. Classified beyond belief. But we know they found something down there. Something that's been waiting. At Potomac River, they were escorted to a secure briefing room where Admiral Jonathan Pierce waited with a tablet displaying satellite imagery of the Pacific. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days. Detective Stone, Agent Reeves, Pierce began without preamble. What I'm about to show you cannot leave this room. 6 hours ago, our satellites captured this. The tablet screen showed thermal imaging of the ocean surface. In the center, a massive shape rose from the depths. Not mechanical, not geological, but something that pulsed with its own internal heat signature. Around it, smaller thermal blooms moved in patterns too organized to be natural. The object emerged after Maverick's aircraft made contact with the carrier group. Our analysis suggests it's been dormant on the sea floor for over a decade, possibly since the original siren incident. Stone leaned forward. You're saying her brother's death woke something up, and now her presence is calling it back to the surface. That's exactly what I'm saying. And Detective, based on your experience with similar cases, we need your assessment. Is this a rescue mission or a threat? Stone studied the thermal image, noting how the smaller shapes moved around the central mass, not randomly, but with purpose, like they were protecting something. Or someone. Admiral, in my experience, when family members risk everything to find each other, it's usually both. The briefing was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Enterprise. The voice of the ship's captain crackled through the secure line, tense and incredulous. Admiral Pierce, you need to see this. Maverick has made contact with the object. She's talking to it, and it's responding. Pierce activated the real-time feed from the carrier's camera systems. On the screen, a lone F/A-18 Hornet circled above the glowing mass in the water. The pilot had opened her canopy and was hovering impossibly low over the surface, close enough that the jet wash should have been causing massive turbulence. Instead, the water was perfectly calm, mirror smooth. Can you enhance the audio? Stone asked. The technician adjusted the feed. Through the static, a woman's voice emerged, calm but filled with emotion. David, I know you're in there. I've been looking for you for 13 years. I never stopped believing. The response came not through radio, but as a vibration that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull itself. When it was filtered and processed, it formed words. Jessica, you shouldn't have come. I'm not what I was. Stone felt a chill run down his spine. In all his years investigating impossible cases, he'd never heard anything like this. A conversation between the living and something that existed beyond conventional understanding. On screen, the glowing mass in the ocean began to rise further, breaking the surface like a living island. As it emerged, its true nature became visible. Not a creature, but a structure. Organic, yes, but also technological. Bioluminescent veins pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the human eye wasn't designed to process such geometry. And then, rising from an opening in its center, came a figure. Stone had seen a lot of impossible things in his career, but this defied every category of experience he developed. The figure wore what looked like a flight suit, scorched and torn but still recognizable. A helmet obscured the face, but the body moved with human intention, human purpose. Razor 6. David Martinez. Somehow impossibly alive. Maverick's voice crackled through the comm again, thick with tears. "Oh God, David. What did they do to you?" The figure on the biostructure raised one arm, a gesture that could have been greeting or warning. When it spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ocean, the air, the metal of the ships themselves. "They didn't do this to me, Jess. I chose it. I chose to stay and guard the door." "What door?" "The one that keeps the deep things sleeping. But now that you're here, now that you've called to me, I don't know if I can hold it closed anymore." In the briefing room, Admiral Pierce stood frozen, his face white. Agent Reeves had her hand on her weapon, though what she thought she could shoot wasn't clear. Stone alone seemed calm, the kind of calm that comes from finally understanding a puzzle that's been haunting you for years. "Admiral," Stone said quietly, "I need you to order all weapons systems to stand down. Right now." "Detective, that thing could be. That thing is a brother trying to protect his sister and everyone else from something worse. And if we threaten him, if we try to separate them again, we're going to find out what he's been guarding against." Pierce hesitated, then gave the order. Across the Pacific Fleet, weapons systems powered down, radar locks disengaged. The tension in the water seemed to ease, just slightly. On screen, Maverick had somehow descended from her aircraft and now stood on the surface of the water itself, supported by the same energy field that surrounded her brother. They faced each other across a gap of a few meters, human and post-human, sister and brother, past and future. "I can't come back, Jess," David said, his voice carrying impossible sadness. "If I leave this place, if I abandon my post, the things that sleep in the deep places will wake, and they remember when the world was theirs. Then I'll stay with you." "No, you have a life, a world above. You don't belong in the depths." Stone watched this cosmic family reunion play out on satellite feed and felt something break inside his chest. In all his years investigating cases the government wanted to forget, he'd seen families torn apart by secrets and lies. But he'd never seen love persist across such impossible circumstances. Maverick stepped closer to her brother. "David, I've spent 13 years looking for you. I gave up everything, my career, my life, my identity. I disappeared into the shadows, chasing ghosts and legends, because I couldn't accept that you were gone. I won't accept it now." The bioluminescent structure pulsed brighter, and Stone realized it was responding to their emotions, their proximity. Whatever David had become, he was still connected to this thing, this guardian entity that had claimed him. "The choice isn't yours to make," David said, "and it's not mine either. It belongs to them." The water around the structure began to churn, not violently, but with purpose. More shapes were rising from the depths, smaller versions of the main mass, each one carrying its own impossible light. As they breached the surface, Stone could see figures within them. Human figures, or what had once been human. Jesus Christ, Admiral Pierce whispered. "How many of them are there?" Stone did a quick count. 12. 13, including David. "Admiral, I think we're looking at the entire original Siren team." The revelation hit like a physical blow. 13 military personnel, officially dead for over a decade, transformed into something between human and something else, standing guard over secrets buried in the deepest parts of the ocean. One of the figures spoke, its voice joining David's in harmonic resonance. "She cannot stay. The water would change her as it changed us. But she cannot leave because the binding requires family blood to maintain." Maverick looked up at her hovering aircraft, then back at her brother. "There's a third option." "Jess, no. I could take your place. Let you rest. Let you all rest." The entire gathering of post-human guardians fell silent. Even the bioluminescent patterns stopped pulsing. In the briefing room, Stone found himself holding his breath. "The substitution is possible," another voice said, "but irreversible. She would become what we are, neither alive nor dead. Guardian of the threshold between what is and what must never be allowed to return." Stone couldn't stay silent any longer. He leaned toward the microphone connected to the carrier's communication system. "Maverick, this is Detective Matt Stone, DC Metro Police. I've been investigating cases like yours for 8 years. Don't do this." Her voice came back immediately, surprised but steady. "Who are you?" "Someone who's seen what happens when families are torn apart by forces beyond their control. Someone who's spent his career trying to reunite people with the truth about what happened to their loved ones. And someone who knows that sacrifice without hope isn't heroism. It's just another kind of death." "Then what do you suggest, Detective?" Stone looked at Admiral Pierce, at Agent Reeves, at the satellite feed, showing impossible beings having an impossible conversation. He thought about all the cases he'd worked, all the families he'd tried to help, all the questions that had never gotten answers. "I suggest we find a fourth option, because in my experience, when people tell you there are only 2 choices, they're usually not thinking hard enough." The silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then David's voice, tinged with something that might have been hope. "What kind of fourth option?" Stone stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over the Potomac River. The water here was normal, muddy, brown mortal, not like the impossible clarity of the Potomac where this all started. Your job is to guard against something waking up in the deep places, right? But you've been doing it alone, cut off from the world above. What if you didn't have to be alone anymore? What if there was a way to maintain the watch while staying connected to the surface? "The transformation is irreversible," one of the guardians said. "We cannot return to what we were, but you could evolve into something new. Detective work taught me that when you can't solve a problem by going backward, sometimes you have to go forward instead. Find a new equilibrium." Agent Reeves stepped forward. "Detective, what exactly are you proposing?" Stone turned back to the screen, where 13 impossible beings waited for his answer. "I'm proposing that instead of choosing between the surface world and the deep world, we create a bridge between them. A way for the Guardians to maintain their watch while remaining connected to humanity. A permanent liaison. That would require..." David's voice trailed off, processing possibilities that had never occurred to him in 13 years of solitary watching. "That would require trust," Stone finished. "Trust between the Guardians and the surface world. Official recognition, support, communication. An end to the secrecy that's been eating all of us alive." Admiral Pierce looked like he'd been asked to authorize contact with hostile aliens, which, Stone reflected, might not be that far from the truth. "Detective, what you're suggesting would require disclosure of classified programs, acknowledgement of non-human intelligence, complete restructuring of a system that's already broken," Stone interrupted. "Admiral, how many more families have to be destroyed? How many more people have to die or disappear or transform into something inhuman, because we're too afraid to admit that the world is bigger and stranger than our classification systems can handle. On screen, Maverick had moved closer to her brother. Close enough to touch, if touching were possible across the barrier between human and post-human existence. "David," she said softly, "what do you think?" For the first time in the conversation, David Martinez sounded like the young pilot he had once been rather than the cosmic guardian he had become. "I think I'd like to try being your brother again, instead of just being afraid for you." The other guardians began to pulse in unison, their bioluminescent patterns synchronizing into something that almost looked like communication, like voting, like democracy among beings that transcended normal human categories. Finally, their consensus emerged in a voice that combined all 13 speakers. "We agree to the bridge. We agree to trust. But the liaison must be someone who understands both worlds, both risks, both possibilities." Stone realized what they were asking before anyone else did. "You want someone from the investigation. Someone who's been tracking these cases, who understands the pattern. We want you, Detective Matt Stone." The briefing room fell dead silent. Agent Reeves, Admiral Pierce, and the various technicians and analysts all turned to stare at Stone, who found himself facing the most important decision of his life. He thought about 18 months of retirement, about fishing on the Chesapeake Bay and reading books and pretending the world made sense. He thought about 23 years of police work, of families desperate for answers, of cases that ended in questions instead of resolution. He thought about Jessica Martinez, hovering impossibly over the Pacific, trying to choose between losing her brother forever and losing herself to save him. "Except," he said, what happened next defied every law of physics Stone thought he understood. The bioluminescent glow from the Pacific somehow reached across 3,000 miles of continent, streaming through the briefing room windows as visible light, as warmth, as something that felt like recognition. When the glow faded, Stone felt different. Not transformed like the Guardians, but connected. He could sense the vast network of watchers spread across the ocean floors, could feel their vigilance, their loneliness, their hope. And in the Pacific, Maverick and her brother stood together on the surface of an impossible sea, no longer separated by death and duty, but united by a bridge between worlds that had never existed before. Stone's phone buzzed with a text message from a number that shouldn't have been able to reach him. "Thank you, Detective. The watch continues, but it's no longer a prison. DM." He looked up at Admiral Pierce and Agent Reeves, both of whom were staring at him with expressions caught between awe and terror. "Well," Stone said, settling back into his chair, "I guess I'm not retired anymore." Through the briefing room windows, the Potomac River flowed with the same impossible clarity he'd seen in the Potomac that morning. The bridge between worlds was more than metaphor now. It was infrastructure. And somewhere in the depths, 13 Guardians continued their watch, no longer alone, no longer forgotten, no longer cut off from the family of humanity they had sworn to protect. The call sign Maverick was no longer prohibited. It was promoted to active status in a new kind of service, a new kind of connection between the world above and the deep places below. Matt Stone, retired detective, cosmic liaison, keeper of impossible truths, opened his first official case file in a job that didn't officially exist. But the story didn't end there. It never does when you're dealing with forces that operate outside conventional reality. 3 weeks after the Pacific Bridge, as the media had dubbed the unprecedented contact between the surface world and the Deep Guardians, Stone found himself in a situation that made his previous impossible cases look routine. He was sitting in the Oval Office, across from a president who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past month, explaining why the United States Navy now had 13 officially deceased personnel on active duty roster, stationed in locations that didn't appear on any map. Detective Stone, President Harrison said, rubbing his temples, "I need you to explain to me how we went from a routine missing pilot case to this." He gestured at the classified briefing folder on his desk, its contents so sensitive that only 7 people in the world were cleared to read them. Stone had been asking himself the same question. "Sir, sometimes you don't solve a case so much as let the case solve itself." The Martinez siblings found each other. The Guardians found purpose beyond mere duty. And we found out that the world is bigger than we thought. Bigger and more dangerous. The Joint Chiefs are telling me we need to militarize this operation, establish control protocols, treat these Guardians as strategic assets. Mr. President, with respect, that's exactly the kind of thinking that created this situation in the first place. These aren't assets to be managed. They're people who made an impossible sacrifice to protect everyone else. The moment we start treating them like weapons is the moment we lose their cooperation. Through the secure communication system installed in the Oval Office, Maverick's voice suddenly crackled to life. She was speaking from the Pacific Liaison Station, a floating platform that had been constructed in just 2 weeks, bridging the gap between the USS Enterprise and the bioluminescent structures where the Guardians maintained their watch. "Mr. President, Detective Stone is right. We didn't survive 13 years in the deep places by accepting orders from the surface. We survived by learning to think in ways your military doctrine can't comprehend. If you want our protection to continue, you need to understand that protection and control are mutually exclusive concepts." The president looked startled. Stone had forgotten to mention that the Guardians could monitor any electronic communication system on Earth when they chose to. Privacy, in the traditional sense, had become somewhat obsolete. "Ms. Martinez," the president said carefully, "we appreciate your service and your sacrifice. But surely you understand that Congress will want oversight, accountability measures." "What Congress will want?" David Martinez's voice joined his sister's, harmonizing in that eerie way that had become normal over the past weeks, "is to sleep safely in their beds without ancient nightmares crawling up from the deep places to devour their constituents. What they won't want is to micromanage the people keeping those nightmares asleep." Stone had to admire the siblings' negotiating style. It was hard to argue with cosmic guardians who spoke truth with the weight of oceanic depths behind their words. The president turned back to Stone. "Detective, you're their liaison. What do they want from us? Recognition, resources, and most importantly, an end to the secrecy that's been eating families alive for decades. There are other guardians out there, Mr. President. Other people who've been transformed by encounters with forces beyond our understanding. Other families who deserve to know what happened to their loved ones." Stone pulled out a file he'd been compiling since accepting his new role. "In the past 3 weeks, I've identified 17 similar cases across the past 30 years. Military personnel, scientists, civilians who encountered unexplained phenomena and either disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. Some of them might still be alive in some form. Their families deserve answers." The president opened Stone's file, scanning the names and dates. His face grew more troubled with each page. "Detective, what you're describing sounds like a complete restructuring of how we handle classified operations." "That's exactly what I'm describing, sir. The old system, compartmentalized secrecy, plausible deniability, treating extraordinary encounters as isolated incidents. That system failed. It failed Jessica Martinez when her brother disappeared. It failed David Martinez when he was transformed into something beyond human. It failed every family that's been left wondering what really happened to their loved ones." From the communication system, Jessica's voice added, "Mr. President, we're not asking for the moon. We're asking for honesty. Let families know when their loved ones encounter forces beyond conventional understanding. Let them know they're not crazy for believing in impossible things. And let them know that death isn't always the end of the story. The president was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the White House lawn. Finally, he spoke. What would this new system look like? Stone had been preparing for this question. We established the Department of Extraordinary Affairs, a civilian agency, not military, tasked with investigating cases involving non-conventional phenomena. When military personnel encounter forces that transform them, their families are notified within reasonable security parameters. When civilians stumble into situations beyond their understanding, they get support instead of cover-ups. And the Guardians? The Guardians continue their watch, but with full support from the surface world. Medical care, when applicable. Communication with families. Recognition for their service. And most importantly, the knowledge that they're not alone, not forgotten, not abandoned to cosmic duty without human connection. The president looked at Stone with something approaching admiration. Detective, you're describing a fundamental change in how humanity relates to the unknown. Yes, sir, I am. Because the unknown isn't staying unknown anymore. These forces, these entities, these transformations, they're becoming more frequent, more visible. We can either adapt our institutions to deal with them honestly, or we can keep lying to families while the world becomes stranger around us. From the Pacific, David's voice added, the deep things are stirring more frequently now. Our connection to the surface world has created new stability, but it's also created new vulnerabilities. Other guardians, other watchers, other protectors, they're starting to emerge from hiding places they've occupied for decades. Humanity is going to encounter more of us, whether your institutions are ready or not. The president made his decision with the kind of swift certainty that had gotten him elected. Detective Stone, congratulations. You're now Director Stone of the newly established Department of Extraordinary Affairs. Draft your budget requests, your personnel needs, your operational protocols. I'll handle Congress. Stone felt the familiar chill of taking on a case that was bigger than he understood. But he also felt something else, hope. For the first time in his career, he was being asked to investigate impossible cases with resources adequate to actually solve them. Thank you, Mr. President. I won't let you down. Don't let the families down, Director. That's who you're really working for. 6 months later, Stone stood on the deck of the Pacific Bridge, watching the sunset paint the ocean in colors that seemed more vivid since the Guardians had awakened. The floating platform had grown into a small city, housing researchers, family members, communication specialists, and the occasional politician brave enough to witness the impossible firsthand. His office was built directly above the main liaison chamber, where the Guardians could surface for face-to-face meetings when necessary. Today was one of those days. Jessica and David Martinez were rising from the depths, accompanied by 2 other Guardians whose identities had been confirmed just last week. Stone walked down to the liaison chamber, a room that was half conference center and half aquarium, filled with water that glowed with the same impossible clarity he'd first noticed in the Potomac River. The Martinez siblings emerged first, their transformed bodies still recognizably human, but adapted for survival in depths no normal person could survive. Director, Jessica said, her voice carrying both above and below the waterline simultaneously, we have news. Stone pulled up a chair to the water's edge. After 6 months, these conversations had become routine, but they never stopped being miraculous. Good news, or cosmic terror news? David laughed, a sound that rippled through the water like music. Both as usual. We've located 3 more Guardian sites. 1 in the Arctic Ocean, 2 in the deep Atlantic. All of them have been dormant for decades, but they're starting to respond to the bridge network we've established here. How many Guardians total? 47 confirmed, with possibly more in locations we haven't mapped yet. Director, you're looking at a shadow network of protectors that spans the globe, all of them volunteers who made impossible sacrifices to keep humanity safe from forces you don't want to understand. Stone made notes on his waterproof tablet. What do they need? Same thing we needed. Connection, recognition, support, and in some cases, reunion with families who think they're dead. The other two Guardians surfaced beside the Martinez siblings. Stone recognized them from photographs. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, no relation to his former partner, and Captain Marcus Webb, both officially killed in action during classified operations in 2018 and 2019 respectively. Director Stone, Sarah said, her voice carrying the same harmonic resonance as all the Guardians, we've been monitoring your department's work. The families you've reunited, the truth you've uncovered, the support you've provided. It's changing everything. How so? Marcus answered, for decades, we've been isolated, cut off from the world we protected. We could sense humanity above us, but we couldn't touch it, couldn't communicate with it, couldn't remember why we'd chosen this existence. Your bridge protocol, your department, your commitment to truth, it's restored our connection to what we're protecting. Stone felt a familiar pride. The same satisfaction he'd experienced when solving cold cases as a detective. But this was bigger than individual cases. This was systemic change, institutional healing, families and protectors reunited across impossible distances. There's more, Jessica added. The deep things, the entities we guard against, they're responding to our renewed connection with humanity. Not aggressively, but curiously. Some of them want to communicate. Stone felt his pulse quicken. Communicate about what? About cooperation instead of mere containment. About understanding instead of fear. About the possibility that the barriers between the surface world and the deep places don't have to be walls. They could be doors. Are we ready for that conversation? David considered the question seriously. Director, 6 months ago, humanity thought it was alone in the universe. Now you have a Department of Extraordinary Affairs, a global network of transformed guardians and families who've learned that death isn't always the end of love. I'd say humanity is adapting faster than anyone expected. Stone looked around the liaison chamber at the impossible technology that allowed air-breathing humans to communicate with water-adapted guardians, at the screens displaying data from 47 monitoring stations around the globe, at the communication terminals that connected bereaved families with their transformed loved ones. Then I guess we'd better get ready for the next impossible thing. As if in response to his words, every screen in the chamber lit up with the same alert. Deep entity communication request detected. Origin, Mariana Trench. Classification, unknown. Recommended response, immediate department director review. Stone sighed, smiled, and reached for his secure phone to call the president. Sir, it's Director Stone. I hope you don't have any plans for the weekend, because the universe just got more interesting again. In the depths below, 47 Guardians maintained their watch with renewed purpose, knowing that their sacrifice was recognized, their families were safe, and their connection to humanity was stronger than ever. And somewhere in the deepest places of the ocean, ancient intelligences prepared for their first official diplomatic contact with the surface world, mediated by love that had learned to transcend every boundary except hope itself. The call sign Maverick was no longer just active. It had become a foundation for a new kind of relationship between humanity and the impossible. And Matt Stone, former detective, current director of Extraordinary Affairs, keeper of impossible truths, and reunion facilitator for cosmic families, prepared to solve the biggest case of his career. The case of establishing peace between worlds that had never been supposed to meet.